And good evening to you. And this is Thanksgiving Day, and I'm taping this for December 1st, which is International AIDS Day. We remember people with AIDS and our history with AIDS. And you know, as I sit here in the cozy warmth of my home with my loved ones, I'm thinking of the millions that have died of the AIDS virus. I've been HIV for 44 years. And in the beginning, I was diagnosed with what they called ARC, AIDS-related complex. Do you know, in November 1981, there was a gentleman in San Francisco by the name of Ken Horn. And he was, according to the CDC, identified as the first person in America of the AIDS epidemic. And in July of 1981, the New York Times had an article that was titled, "Rare Cancer Seen in 41 Homosexuals." And that led to the term which we called gay cancer to describe carcinoma. And in January of 1983, the first dedicated outpatient clinic for AIDS people opened at San Francisco General Hospital because people were facing the social stigma of having AIDS and living for the short term with it. And they needed a place that they could actually die with dignity. Now, some of you are recently diagnosed with HIV, meaning in the last 10, 15 years. But 44 years ago, you love my smile. I couldn't see a dentist because, you see, dentists wouldn't see us. 44 years ago, I was asked not to come to church because, you see, people lived in fear that even if you suspected somebody being a gay person, that they probably had AIDS and that you would get it. I remember that we drank beer out of straws. We did those air kisses. Nobody knew quite how you got it. Now, in March of 1983, the CDC finally published an article, and I'm going to quote you on what it said. It said, quote, "Among gay men with multiple sexual partners, people living with who inject drugs, Haitians, and people with hemophilia, it suggests that sexual contact and exposure to blood and blood products are the most likely reasons for getting the disease." Still nobody said anything. Government didn't say anything. Churches. Do you know, I work for the DAP Health here in Palm Springs, which 40 years ago was called, well, 40 years ago it wasn't Desert AIDS Project. Desert AIDS Project actually was started in the living room of 4 men here in the Coachella Valley, that because of religious organizations, political organizations, and yes, health organizations, wouldn't have anything to do with people with AIDS. So they decided that they would put together a consultant firm. It wasn't a medical firm. It was a consulting firm, so that people could find out where to get the help that they needed, because people weren't getting the help that they needed that had AIDS. People were dying and dropping like flies. I remember so well that a bunch of us who were entertainers, we used to meet for cocktails at a place called The Loft in San Diego on Friday afternoons. And one day my friend Ronnie, who was hairdresser to the stars, I said, "Where's Ronnie?" And they said, "Oh, he had the flu, he had to go to Kaiser." And I said, "I'm doing a gig tomorrow," which was Saturday. And I said, I'll stop in to see him on Sunday. By the time Sunday came, he had died. I knew his parents really well. They were very religious people. And people knew that I had been an ordained minister and was an ordained minister. So, them being very religious people, they wanted to, first, they wanted a mortuary to have them so that he could have the viewing. No mortuary would take him because he had died of AIDS. When they finally did get one that would take him, then they wanted to have the celebration of life, the church service, in their church that they were members of and had been members of for years. They were told, "No, we can't have those kind of people coming here." We couldn't get a permit from the city to have the celebration of life in the park. So finally they said to me, "Hey, you're an ordained minister. Could we have a small celebration of life in our living room, part of our family room, that we can say goodbye to Ronnie?" Oh, those were the times. I remember my friend Stevie, my best friend, my absolute best friend. He's what I call the Hollywood hot patootie. He had the looks, he had the personality. Oh man, he had it all. And one day he had a sore throat, and he says, I've got to go have this checked." That's the last I spoke to him, because he went into the hospital and never came back. I had his parents' information in Indiana. I called. They never came to claim the body. They wouldn't have anything to do with him. First he was gay, now he had the AIDS. Today, all these years later, I have no idea what happened with his body. Never got a chance to say how much I loved him and how much he meant to me. Those were what the early days were like. 1985, in July, Rock Hudson, who was a famous romantic actor, what we call the golden age of Hollywood. He had a secret that Hollywood never talked about. Rock was homosexual. Even though he was a leading man in a lot of romantic comedies with Doris Day and others, strikingly handsome. Eventually he died of AIDS, and the media began to cover, for the first time, the increased dramatic coverage that followed the months after. In the media, somebody important, although we're all important, aren't we? All of them, we're all somebody. But somebody that had a name had died of AIDS. The gay plague, as we know it, the gay cancer. In August of that year, a young teenager by the name of Ryan White, which a lot of the grants that help HIV people today are named after, he contracted AIDS through a blood transfusion, through blood that was donated. He wasn't allowed, he was banned from going to middle school in the state of Indiana due to his condition. Yes, eventually he died. Finally, in September, President Ronald Reagan, for the first time, mentioned AIDS publicly. He called it top priority. Political action hadn't been taken seriously up until then. How many thousands, how many millions have to die before someone takes something seriously? You see, 40 years ago, same-sex marriage was illegal. Oh, evangelical churches across America were still trying to do the ex-gay, anti-gay, to pray the gayness out of you, to cast the demon of gayness out of you. It was still considered a mental disorder. And some people still consider, if you love the same sex, to be a mental disorder. Who am I kidding? They consider transgender to be a mental disorder. But isn't the truth? Anytime you don't love, that's what the disorder is. Anytime you hate, that's what the disorder is. Anytime your judgment of others and don't treat others with kindness, isn't that what the real disorder is? Anytime you harden your heart, isn't that what the real disorder is? World AIDS Day. A day we stop. A day we reflect. A day I give thanks for how far we have come. Do you know, 44 years ago, I didn't take medication. 40 years ago, I didn't take medication. 30 years ago, I didn't take medication. And some people say, why? The stigma, for one. And two, people in my community were dying just as fast of the drugs they were taking that nobody knew for sure what was happening. And yes, it may kill part of the virus, but it also killed some of the other cells in your body. I saw what was happening to my brothers in the community. My T cells were 1140, and I elected to just disappear from that element of having to take drugs, and decided at that time what I would do is I would do fundraisers. I would donate money. I would donate time. I remember that I would go to Auntie Helen's Fluff and Fold when I lived in San Diego, and I would help do laundry for AIDS patients. Oh, I remember this one time that we went to pick up the laundry for this one patient, and we went in, and he was young, and he looked like he was been part of the Holocaust. We did the laundry, and as we brought it back, I set the basket down. I happened to look on the fireplace mantle, much like mine here. I saw his picture. I started crying because, oh my God. I used to think when I would see him at the clubs how handsome he was and how much I really wanted to go out with him. Of course, he never knew I existed. I was just part of the woodwork. But I remember for years wanting to go out with him. And there I see him laying in the hospital bed with tubes, hardly recognizable to the young person that was in the picture. I remember working at a restaurant and managing a restaurant. And before we would open for lunch, we would make bag lunches, brown bag lunches, so that people could pick them up and take them to AIDS patients. Act up, act out, act up through San Francisco, through New York, through Los Angeles, act up everywhere. People begin to act up and act out, say, we have a voice. Something has to be done about this. Oh, I remember when the AIDS quilt came out. Y'all are watching football these days, you guys, some of you girls too. And you see how big the football field is. Just imagine triple the football field, and it filled with quilt patterns of people who had died of AIDS. Several years later, I don't remember exactly when it was, but I was in San Francisco, and the AIDS memorial quilt, was being on display there at Moscone Center. I hadn't seen it before. I couldn't bring myself to see it. I said, okay, I've got to see this now. I think it must have been in the late 90s. I can't remember exactly when. I remember taking the escalator down the stairs. And I remember opening the door, and I saw the vastness of the quilt laid out. And I stepped inside, and I looked down at my feet. I personally knew the first person whose paddle was laid out. I moved to my right. I knew that person. I kept moving, and I looked across. I still remember it like it was today. Talented, beautiful, incredible men who had died because of this AIDS virus. I thought, what if we would have tried to find a cure sooner? I was just doing some research for some projects earlier today, and I ran across a part of the research that said that actually AIDS, there was a strain of it in 1920. But why didn't we start catching things earlier? And why did AIDS now have to spread to Africa and a whole continent out there, and into women and to children? Oh yeah, because it was the gay disease. It was the gay plague. And because we're not gay, we're not going to donate any money to research. BS. Shame on people who thought that. So tonight, as I sit and I reflect in the comfort of my home, getting ready for the holidays, me, little Minnie, Paul, people I'm so grateful for. I'm also remembering those, and remembering some of you who have lost brothers, who have lost, yes, sisters, who have lost lovers. But we don't forget. Let us never forget. Let us remember. And as we remember, let us go forward, always remembering to have love in our hearts. Always remembering to walk and stand for something. Stand for civil rights. Stand for equality for all. Stand for equality across the board. Do you know, we're living in a day and age now, and yes, I do take HIV meds now. I have for the last 15 years. AIDS at one time was a death sentence, and still in many parts of the world it is still a death sentence. Let me rephrase that. Even in different places in our country, our United States, it's still a death sentence because of lack of being treated and ignorance. So, as it is a manageable disease now, much like diabetes is with insulin, a lot of the federal funding for AIDS clinics across the nation, the funding has dried up. And I suspect with this new administration coming in, that we're going to see a lot of funding cuts for healthcare concerning LGBTQ, trans, gay, bi. And it's a time that, as we remember the AIDS crisis, that we also remember that LGBTQ is not only one letter. It's all of the letters together. It's community. We are a community, not out for just ourselves, but inclusive of one another. It does not matter if you don't understand the leather community. It does not matter if you don't understand the trans community. It does not matter, and do not be judgmental on the drug addiction community. What matters is that we open up our hearts, open up our minds. How are we going to meet the needs of our LGBTQ plus community as we move forward in 2024, 25, 26, 27, and hopefully that there's light at the end of the tunnel, that there's hope. So as I say to you today, Viktor Frankl, who was a survivor from the Holocaust, in his book, Men's Search for Meaning. He said, as long as you have choice, you're free. You have a choice today. You have a choice, just like the lesbian sisters that I'm so thankful for today even. The lesbian sisters that at the early days of the AIDS crisis, they went and picked up the gay brothers and took them to treatment. They went and took care of the gay brothers and changed their linen and their soiled diapers. They went and spoon-fed people. They went and put cloths on their head to cool them and give them comfort. Let's be peacemakers. But, if we need to speak up, let's speak up for justice. Let's speak up for rightness. Let's speak up for all, not just gay, but the migrant workers that farm our food. You know, I said to somebody the other day, I said, you know, we better learn how to eat sparingly, because if, according to the new president, he's going to start rounding up people, he's probably going to start in the fields with the laborers that grow our food, and there'll be nobody to go pick up the food. Are you going to be farming the food? I know I'm not. And it's going to rot in the fields. The prices will go sky high. We won't be able to afford a loaf of bread. The embargoes that are coming, we won't be able to afford anything. So we've got to begin to really see what our resources is in one another. What are you made out of? Are you made out of love? Are you made out of judgment? Are you made out of peace? Or are you made out of hatred? And isn't what happens to you? It's how you respond to what happens. I'm grateful that I've been able to live, survive, and thrive 44 years through during the AIDS epidemic as we know it. I am blessed, and I do not take that for granted. This is Dr. D saying, have hope. Have hope, because hope, peace, and love are our keys.